All right, so in the last class, they spoke about working with buyers and sellers from the agreement to the point of getting an offer. Today, we're going to cover the actual offer process. We're going to cover the steps to submitting an offer as a buyer's agent and reviewing the offer as a listing agent. So, my understanding is that people are joining from everywhere, all throughout the country. Is that the case? Okay, so I have an example of a contract here in the DC area with the General Capital Area Association of Realtors, which won't be as relevant to all of you. I'll probably still hit some of it to cover kind of the main terms, but our all of our forms and contracts are going to vary a fair amount. Okay, Canada, nice. Also, didn't mean to discriminate. Wonderful to have everyone from the U.S. and outside. So all of our forms are going to vary a fair amount. Some of these terms, some of these forms and these types of contingencies aren't going to exist in the exact same format they do for you. For example, here for the Greater Capital Area Association of Realtors, we have contingencies and forms for almost everything. There is a separate finance contingency document which covers the conditional commitment and the appraisal contingency. We have an addendum of clauses A and B, which cover more specific contingencies like home inspection and radon and various things. Whereas I know some of you in other parts of the country simply have a due diligence period that gets negotiated in. And you have a due diligence period, you have a certain amount of time, and you need to use that to cover all of your contingencies, whereas we're a little more specific. Okay, we are going to start here with the offer process, and we're going to get into the specifics of preparing an offer, writing an offer, presenting the offer, then getting a response. So here, if we're presenting the offer, we're representing the buyer, and then we'll be waiting for a response from the listing agent. Then we're going to cover kind of a recap and the ahas, and then we're going to move on to the next section, which is the negotiating offers. Okay, the offer process. So this is relatively straightforward. Sorry, admitting more people again. Okay, so this is relatively straightforward, regardless of where you are. There is the process that you will make an offer, and then a seller can respond in one of three ways. The seller can either and the seller can either accept the offer outright, and if that's the case, you will have a ratified contract. You begin the contract to close process and all the various steps that that entails: termite inspection, getting the financing, getting underwriting completed, and getting a conditional commitment, having the appraisal, all of those various steps, title. That will just start you forward on that process. We're not going to focus on that today. We're going to focus more on what happens before you get to that point. And in those situations, it's either, and this is usually the case, it's somewhat rare that the sellers just completely accept the offer as is, but it does happen. Oftentimes, you will get a counteroffer, in which case negotiation starts, or the seller will reject the offer outright. That is, in my experience, relatively rare because if a seller has a property on the market, it means they want to sell it, and an offer in hand is much more valuable than just waiting for someone else to materialize. So generally, the seller will like to work with someone who has raised their hand and issued a formal commitment to purchase the home, even if it's not at the terms that they prefer. I just want to add here, they have in the comments, if you do get a rejection, it's always, and this goes back to communication, it's always important to reach out to the listing agent. And if there's not sufficient detail in whatever form of communication the rejection was transmitted in, reach out to the listing agent, try to get more information, try to understand what's happening there. It's as important. And don't assume that no means no. It might just be a negotiating tactic. You might want to come back with an additional offer, change some terms, or learn what is important to the seller. And on that note, I would say, talking about how we said before, negotiation starts the first moment you have contact with any agent, but getting more specific, when you have a buyer who's interested in the property, if you're planning on making an offer, don't assume that you know what a good offer looks like. Don't assume that you understand what is important to the seller. Now, in a lot of circumstances, it's high price, fewest contingencies, quickest settlement. But that's not always the case. Sometimes the seller might need some time to move out of the house. They might want to rent back. There might be some unusual circumstances. And so one of the earliest steps that I would recommend is just reaching out to the listing agent. If you haven't spoken with them already, introduce yourself, establish some form of relationship, and then ask them what is important to your seller. And I always say, other than price, because price is always important. But I'll say, other than price, what is important to your seller? And then stop talking and just listen as long as they want to talk, as long as they want to share. And oftentimes you can learn some fairly interesting things, which can help when you are drafting your offer. And one of the things that were mentioned in the chat as far as a takeaway from this is how to make your offer stand out. And that's an easy way right off the bat. Like, don't just make a standard offer that you think might be strong. Try to tailor it specifically to the needs and wants of these specific sellers. Okay, I'd like to, we're still early on. The slide asked for some ahas. I would like to, if anyone has any ahas, just the few minutes of what we covered, feel free to jump in. But I'd also like some questions related to that. Kind of what we've talked about, the initial steps of this. Anything we'd like to cover in a little bit more detail?
I was just curious if you were on the other side and someone asks what's important to your client, how do you toe the line of revealing information that you think is relevant but not giving away confidential aspects of what you know?
Great question. And it really depends on, for me, I'll typically have just set in my mind, okay, these are things that are permissible to communicate to buyer agents, and these are things that are confidential. I would never want to convey something like, so for example, recently in the contract example that I have here to share today, my seller had just completed a divorce, no longer lived in the area, wanted to sell the property as soon as possible because she was going to purchase a property where she lived, and their timing was very important to her, and she wanted to get it sold as quickly as possible. That I I would not convey anything along those lines to a buyer agent, because I think that would give them an unfair advantage. That would be conveying confidential information. But I would say, well, my seller she no longer lives in the area. As you know, the property's empty, the property's staged. So, the sooner we close, the better. And not give too much information, or cross that line into confidential information of how important it was to sell it quickly, but kind of reinforce the obvious. And that's the case with most vacant and staged properties. Okay, the sellers are gone, so let's have a sooner settlement. Let's get our money a little bit more quickly. And so that's kind of an example of where I would toe that line in a situation like that.
Thank you.
Absolutely. The I'll just add a couple more things. It's the saying, cooler heads should prevail. And in this process, we should be the cooler heads. If we're acting here in the context of a buyer agent and the listing agent on the other side, we should remain calm, we should remain objective, and we should keep the communication positive, because these are really important uh, these are really important transactions for our clients, and they're important to us. But for them, the buyer could be purchasing the most expensive asset, the most money they've ever spent in their life, what will provide the foundation for kind of wealth building in all of their financial plans for the next decade or 20 years going forward. It could be the place their family will grow up in. And then for the seller, who knows why they are selling, what's happening, what they're going to do with these funds, but it's also a very important financial transaction. And it's really easy for them to become emotional about aspects of the process, particularly in negotiation. I don't know how many times I've had clients of mine where we'll get a counter offer, or there will be a delay in a response, or we'll receive an offer and there will be a term, and somehow they'll get offended and they'll start imagining what's going on the other side. And I always tell my clients, like, listen, we have no way of knowing what the motivation is on the other side, or what is underlying these actions. And so there's no point in us getting upset assuming the worst. Let's just take them at face value. Let's look at this objectively. In the instances where we're representing a buyer, I'll just say, like regardless of what's happening with them, this is still a wonderful house. It's still the same house you wanted to put an offer on, you would love to live in. So let's just focus on getting that, and let's stay objective. And the more you can help keep the emotion out of your process, and how you can keep your clients on an even keel, and you can refrain from kind of getting emotional or confrontational with the agent on the other side, the better served you will be. The materials in various spots will reference command, and I just want to note that we're not covering command today, so we're not going to talk about anything on the tech side, but they will be covering that on Thursday. Okay, some of these are so straightforward that I feel a little silly mentioning them, but if you're going to write an offer, before you do so, make sure the property is still available. Make sure it is still listed, actively listed on the market. Make sure it's not under contract. Now, we talked about, we have people from all over the country and outside of the country, so that it's going to vary tremendously. I'm just going to try to make some blanket statements that'll hopefully appeal to, or that will be the case for everyone. But here we have, it can be under contract in two different situations. One still allows showings, and sellers can accept backup offers. So if you have a client who is interested in submitting an offer and you look and see it's under contract, if that same thing exists in your area, if they are allowing backup offers or are still allowing showings, then it's still possible to see the property, potentially submit an offer, even if it is under contract. If it's been taken off the market, don't just take that as, oh, the property's gone, we'll have to move on. Usually, if the property is taken off the market, it's for some kind of reason that relates to things not going well. Either they weren't getting the response they wanted, they want to take it off, do some updates, they're heading into a slow time around a holiday, and they think they'll just go temp off for a little bit and bring it back on. So absolutely, if you plan to submit an offer on a property, if you have an interested buyer and you see that that has been taken off the market, reach out to the listing agent, find out why. And oftentimes it'll be some kind of situation where if they were planning on putting it back on and you indicate you want to submit an offer, they'll just go ahead and do that in a time frame that works for you. So building rapport with the listing agent. This goes back to what I was talking about, and I would say it goes beyond that. Like I said, anytime you communicate with any agent in your area, they are potentially a co-op agent on the other side, whether you're the listing agent, they're a buyer agent, or vice versa. So this negotiation, building rapport, starts moment one with anybody, but the stakes are obviously higher when you have an interested buyer and you're reaching out to a listing agent. And so build rapport, and with rapport, I would say, I feel like one of the most important things for me when I am representing my buyers to a listing agent is to show that I'm competent, that I know what I'm doing, that I communicate well, and that my clients are well counseled. Because getting under contract is great, but it means nothing if you can't get to closing. And I've been able to get under contract with buyers in situations where we weren't the highest offer price, where we didn't have all of the best terms, but the listing agent and the seller felt like they had the best chance to get to settlement with a relatively smooth process with me, because of how I communicated with them, because of assurances I made, and because of my reputation. And just adding, I usually say this right off the bat, but got distracted with some other things. Just a little bit about me, like where this is all coming from. Been in real estate, not an incredibly long time, but a fair chunk. I'd say like 7, 8 years. Got into real estate in 2017, affiliated with Keller Williams, and joined Fulcrum Residential, which is the team I'm on. at the same time. Since then, my volume's been around 10 million a year. Some years it's been higher, some years it's been lower, dipped a little bit when the market started shrinking, and then I just ramped up my activities and got that back. So last year, I think I did about 12 million in volume. Fulcrum, we do anywhere from 200 to 450 transactions a year for 120-ish million to 250 million in volume. Our average price point in the DC area is right around, I'd say, $600,000 for average sale price. So just brief snippet and then breakdown. Say I tend to list more properties, represent more sellers than buyers, but it's fairly close, maybe 60-40. Okay, so now going back to reaching out to the listing agent and what information you can get. Inquire about activity. So one of the things, and I don't know how all of your MLSs will work, but when the pandemic hit, here it used to be when you would schedule a showing on showing time, they would allow overlapping showings. You couldn't tell what showing activity was like. Once the pandemic hit, a lot of agents didn't allow overlapping showings. And now that that's behind us, kind of an artifact of that is agents still here at least a lot of times will not allow overlapping showings. So if you have a similar system, that's a great way to get intel just right off the bat without even reaching out to the listing agent, is to go in when you go to schedule your showing, just look and see what other times have been blocked off. And I'll do that even once I have a showing scheduled or after we've done the showing. If my buyer is interested, I'll just kind of lurk in there and go into the system and see. And if they're not allowing overlapping showings, I'll be able to tell and have a pretty good indication of what their showing activity has been like. But beyond that, direct question to the listing agent is helpful. And I'll typically say, I'll just call them up and I'll say, like, what's your showing activity been like? How many showings you have scheduled? Do you have any? I don't know if the level that pre-inspections happen in other parts of the country, but here, if you have a hot property and you have a fair amount of interest, a lot of times buyers will do a pre-offer inspection so that they can waive the inspection contingency. That's helpful to know because usually if someone has gone through the expense and time of inspecting the property prior to an offer, unless they find something that is extremely problematic, they're going to submit an offer. So that's a good proxy. If you've had 3 pre-inspections, that probably means you are having 3 other offers submitted. And so that's just kind of an easy way to help track that. Number 5 is going to what I mentioned before. Ask questions about the seller motivations and skipped ahead. Ask about the seller motivations and needs. Sometimes, so I said usually it's sellers like quicker settlements. Well, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they need time to move. They need time to get some things sorted out. And so they don't want to close quickly. So if you just think, oh, I can do a 2 or 3 week close, we're going to write an offer with that and they're going to think it's wonderful. If they need 6 weeks to be out of the home, then it's just going to make you look a little silly and you're going to have to revise those terms because you didn't ask those questions to begin with. Ask the listing agent how they want to receive the offer. So here, that's not really a thing. Pretty much all offers are submitted via email. Even if you have wet ink signatures on hard copies, they'll be scanned in and submitted via email. If you live in an area where people present offers in person, where there are other ways of doing that, by all means ask that question. But here, that's not the case. Obtain the buyer's pre-approval from a lender. Generally, with my buyers, if I'm not showing people properties until they're already either pre-approved or I know it's kind of that's all ready to go and it just takes a text to the loan officer to get that right away. So usually that's already happening in the background. But once we identify a specific property that we're going to submit an offer on, then I'll reach out to the loan officer and just say, hey, can you get me a letter for this address at this amount? Review MLS and tax records. It's it's helpful just to understand. Make sure your understanding of the property, the rooms, the size, the owner. That's always good. Listing agent should catch this if you have somebody trying to fraudulently convey a property. But check the tax record and just make sure the people in the disclosures listed as the seller are the sellers of record. Produce a comparative market analysis. Number 9, this is so for me, I don't always do a formal comparative market analysis in a polished document for my clients, it really depends on what level of information they need. Sometimes if I've been working with them for a fair amount and we've discussed the market, and we've talked about this stuff in detail, I'll just kind of run through it verbally and say, this is, we've talked about this property, this property, this property. You've seen these three, they're priced at this. This is how they vary, and give them kind of a verbal assessment of market value. If we haven't had that level of interaction in person, then I'll something of that nature in writing to varying degrees of detail and specificity. And usually that just depends on the needs of my clients. Sometimes my clients will just be like, Paul, I trust you. I know you know what you're talking about. So you just come up with what you think is the market value and tell me a number. Other times they want to know exactly what's under the hood and what data I am using to come up with those assessments. Then number 10, obtain a seller's disclosure statement and other needed documents. Here, they can either be on the MLS and we can simply download them, uh, or if the listing agent has chosen not to put them on the MLS, we reach out to the listing agent directly to ask for those. And just kind of flipping sides here for a minute. Um, just flipping sides here for a minute. I don't put, we can put our disclosures up on the MLS here. I don't do that for any of my listings. I used to, particularly when I was busier and didn't want to have to deal with it. But now I just find that invaluable because you can't write an offer without getting the disclosures. And I want that piece of intel. I don't want anyone to be able to get disclosures for my listing without me knowing it, because it's incredibly useful for gauging the level of interest in your property. So I never put them up online. I always want the agents to have to reach out to me, so you can't have kind of this demand that you're not aware of lurking in the background. And I can't tell you, when I did put them up on the MLS, I can't tell you how many times in a hot market I would get offers from people I had no idea about, agents I had never spoken to, with buyers that I was not aware of. It would be like somebody who just slipped into an open house when it was extremely busy, and ideally you want to obtain their contact information, but just kind of popped in, didn't express any interest, and then an offer just gets dropped in your lap. And obviously, as a listing agent, in order to get the best deal for your client, it's important to have an accurate view of what the level of interest is, so you can try to increase that. All right. Any ahas, questions about what we have just covered? Chat. In Canada, buyers, realtors can ask for seller's motivation, yet it depends on whether the seller wants to disclose. Thank you for adding that, Donna. And I think that's the case in most places. And even if it's not explicitly the case, that's best practices. Like, don't make sure you understand what your client, on both sides, what your client is comfortable with you sharing and what they're not comfortable. And then also, we should all just have our own common sense when it comes to negotiation, and we don't want to communicate things that put our clients at a disadvantage or decrease our negotiating leverage, and vice versa. Any other thoughts, questions from that before we move on? Preference on cash buyers as proof of income. So, Beagle, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Are you asking what most sellers, most listing agents, what me as a listing agent, what I would prefer as the proof of income if it is a cash buyer? Or are you just talking about cash buyers are generally preferred over financing, or asking if that's the case? Documents. Okay. Yeah, for me, I don't have a preference of type of documents as long as it's something legitimate. And usually, generally for my buyers who are cash buyers, or if I'm the listing agent and I'm getting a proof of funds from a buyer, I'll just want an account statement. And I'll want the account statement to show either liquid funds or funds that can be liquid within the time frame that's called for in the offer. excuse me, and I want the name on the account to match up with the name of the person submitting an offer. And if it doesn't, sometimes you have parents helping out, you have family helping out. Then I either want that connection made explicitly clear. Sometimes that can just be in an email, or other times, if it seems a little more tenuous, then I might want a letter stating exactly what the connection is in these accounts. And the reason I just say liquid funds is, if some types of investments take longer to liquidate, and so you just want to make sure, if there's a large EMD, and this is where the funds are coming from, can they deposit it in time? And if you're having a quick settlement, can whatever these investments are, can they be liquidated in time to satisfy the obligations of settlement? And usually it's the case. I've never had much of a problem with proof of funds, but if you see something sketchy, or you see something that's a little problematic, or anything that I would say, with all things, go with your gut. If something doesn't seem right, then ask for additional information when you're on the listing side. And then as a buyer agent, you don't want to create a situation where the listing agent is concerned about your seller's proof of funds. Usually, if you're submitting an offer as a cash buyer, that gives you a little bit of a leg up, and you want to make sure that that's a positive and it doesn't turn into a negative. You are welcome. Okay, writing the offer. I'm I had an offer prepared, but when I was usually, they with these, when you teach these classes, you'll show an offer, and just like an actual offer that I've ratified, which I did, but just realizing now that people are here from all over the country, I don't think it'll be that relevant to share a a local form. These, I'm wearing this headset because they have noise canceling. I'm not sure how well the noise canceling works. So I just wanted to mention, if you can hear a crying infant, that is because I am a new daddy and I have a 5-week old. So I'm doing this from home, and she's in the back, and I think she's getting a little hungry. So if you can't hear that, hopefully it's not too loud, but we shall carry on. We're family friendly. That is wonderful. Thank you all very much. Um,
Congrats.
thank you. Yeah, not sure yet how exactly I'm going to balance practicing real estate and raising a kid, but I'm sure I'll get that figured out in short order. Um, okay. So write an offer, just standard. Price and terms. Price is usually the most important thing. So if you're not in the ballpark of what's going to be acceptable to the seller, then all the rest really doesn't matter that much. And I'll take a moment to comment on that. I I don't view my job as telling my clients what to do. I view it as, I provide them information, I give them the benefit of my experience and expertise, and then they make the decisions. I'm never telling my clients what to do, I'm never pushing them in a general direction. But my personal exception to that, at least, is if I feel they're doing something that is a complete waste of their time, that isn't in their best interest, then sometimes I'll be a little more forceful. And just get, on one end of that, I've had clients who wanted to submit an offer that I knew had zero chance of being accepted. Like, just no chance at all. And it wasn't even going to be a productive starting point. And so I would make that clear. And I would give them supporting information as to why I felt that way. I would say, if you really want to get this house, why don't we submit an offer that has at least a chance of being accepted? That being said, if they say, no, Paul, I want to submit the offer at these terms, then I'll go ahead and do so. We have fiduciary obligations. We have a duty of obedience. I'll submit any offer with legal terms that my clients wish to. But if your client's wanting to submit an offer that you feel has zero chance of being accepted, then I think it's incumbent upon us as fiduciaries, and looking out for their interests, to counsel them as to its competitiveness and what changes could be made in order to give them a better chance of actually getting the home and being under contract. So the seller's disclosures, we already talked about that. Here, the disclosures are generally, there's a property condition statement, unless it's an estate or some other circumstances, and the seller will have to communicate uh, various things about the plumbing and the systems and the roof and the basement and whether there have been problems with fire and flooding. And I know it's very similar in a lot of places. So that is those disclosures generally will just be your checking boxes and you are signing terms. Here we would indicate if the buyer is a first time home buyer and various things like that. Conveyances, so this is everyone has their own forms, but it's like what conveys. I know when we all took the license test, we talked about, what's a fixture and what is not a fixture. But it's important to, is somebody planning on taking all of their appliances? Usually not. But here we have disclosure forms that will indicate which appliances are remaining. And so that's good to just confirm and make sure everyone is on the same page. And then personally, I just like to ask if I see something that looks like a built-in, but I'm not sure if it's built in, or something that looks like it's a fixed, but it's not entirely sure. If there's anything that I think it's unclear to me, or it could be unclear to somebody if this is a fixture or not, or if it's conveying or not, I either want to make sure it's documented already in the disclosures, or if it's not, then I ask the listing agent to clarify that. Earnest money. I'd actually, I'm just curious, just don't want to take too much time on this, but here in core DC, earnest money is generally 3 to 5% of the purchase price. That's kind of the range of of acceptable that wouldn't cause a seller to to be concerned about it. But I know when you get a little farther out in Maryland, there's some contracts regardless of purchase price where it's just $1,000. $1,000 is the EMD regardless of home sale price. In the chat box, if people can just throw out, curious to hear what EMD levels are there. Are they flat dollar amounts? Are they percentages of purchase price? I think that would just be interesting. Then due diligence inspection period. I mentioned that here we have, at least in DC, we have in Maryland and Northern Virginia, we have contingencies for almost everything. So if there's something that you want protection on, there's a specific form with a specific date range. Other areas there have the due diligence periods where it's more of a all-encompassing, broader, you negotiate for a certain amount of time to conduct your due diligence. Number 6, time for seller acceptance. This varies also. Here, common protocol is that if you submit an offer, generally you should get a response within 24 hours. But we also shouldn't make assumptions. And so I always like to, if there's anything where there's a particular reason that timing is more important, I make that explicitly clear. If there's not, or if I'm trying to curry favor more and I'm not concerned about someone else coming in, then I'll usually ask the seller the availability of, or I'll ask the listing agent the availability of their clients, when they expect to be able to present the offer and when they might have a response. And that's helpful regardless, just to get an idea of when they're able to present. Sometimes you have sellers who are readily available and it can be presented, everybody's online and tech savvy, things can be presented, within 10 minutes. Other times you have people traveling, people overseas, people who are not tech savvy who need to be shown hard copy documents in person, and it can vary tremendously. EMD, either flat amount, no more than 5%. Due diligence money preferred over earnest money, flat fee in Greenville, North Carolina. Yeah. Thanks, Tina. So that's, yeah, I know in North Carolina, I had an agent on my team who was from North Carolina, and it's just the practice was so different there. And it's one of the things we have a lot of, things are very similar all throughout the country in a lot of ways, but when it comes to the practice of real estate, it really is local, and the forms and the practices can vary tremendously. Michelle, 1 to 2%, nice. Usually 1%, flat dollar. Okay, yeah, thanks for the input there. All right, financing terms. Here, the key financing terms are just number of days to conditional commitment and number of days until the appraisal comes in. You don't have to have that in every offer, but if you, as a buyer, have bargaining position, then you like to include those. And I know that our market here is a little softer in some areas than it used to be, and I know that's the case in a lot of the country. There are still pockets where the markets are hotter, but in general, we're encountering less multiple offer situations. And so this might not be necessary as much for you going forward, but I just want to note in talking about these contingencies and due diligence periods, there still are a lot of multiple offer situations here in the DMV. And when there are, a lot of times I'll have discussions with my buyers and I've submitted many clean offers with zero contingencies, even when my clients are getting financing. And I've submitted, I don't like to do this. I counsel my clients as far as all of the risks and potential pitfalls of this, but I've actually submitted clean offers with zero contingencies on sight unseen properties that my client had not seen at all. And after extensively counseling them to the risks, they still wanted to do that, and so we proceeded. But in a hotter market, when there is competition, sometimes in order to win the day, you do need to leave out some contingencies. And if you're going to do that, it's just important to talk to your clients about the risk for that. If you don't have a finance contingency and financing fails, you don't have the right to void the contract. You could be in breach of contract. You could be opening yourself up to legal liability. If you don't do a home inspection and there are problems in the home that you don't discover, that could obviously be very unpleasant for you. But in competitive markets, a lot of times in order to get under contract with our buyers, that's what we need to do. All right, financing terms here. The only relevance, like I mentioned, for the contingencies really is the date range. We have forms where we can fill out the interest rate, but that's irrelevant from a legal perspective as it relates to the contract. Buyer pre-approval letter here, we include that as the first page or after the summary in the offer. Closing date, that's a big one. As far as terms, usually it's money and number of contingencies and closing date. Sellers generally like the sooner the better, but like I said, sometimes they need more time. Going back to competitive situation, if there have been instances where it's been a competitive situation, the sellers needed more time in order to move, to do some things they needed to do before they could be out of the home. But to put us in a better situation, and going back to the question earlier about how do you differentiate yourself in offers, I've had buyers who did a 2 or 3 week close. Usually here, if you're doing cash, 2 weeks is about as quick as you can close. With title, financing, we can close as quick as 2 weeks. Sometimes it takes 3 weeks if condos can be a little bit longer. But I've had multiple situations where my buyers, we would do a 2 or 3 week close and then give a rent back to the seller. So we would have settlement as soon as possible. They would get their money as soon as possible, make them happy, but then we would give them time to still be in the home for whatever they needed to move out and be set. I'm just looking at the chat. Our market was so competitive that husband made an offer on our house without me. My realtor was very nervous. Thankfully, I loved it. Yeah, I messaged some clients today, had a memory pop up of 4 years since our home inspection. And the home inspection was the first time the wife had seen the property because we had to move quickly. The husband saw it. They were aligned. They knew each other's interests. They knew what each what the other wanted in the house. He was like, "You'll like it. You'll love it. Let's do it." So they submitted the offer. They got under contract, and the wife had not seen the home until we came for the home inspection after that. Home warranty. So yeah. Yeah, when you get into competitive markets, there are a lot of kind of crazy things that happen in order to get homes. And for us as agents, it's not, like I said, I've submitted offers that made me very uncomfortable because of the risks my clients were taking, but it's not my job to tell them not to. It's only my job to explain to them the risks, the potential risks from the decisions they are making. And if they are okay to assume that risk, that's their decision. And sometimes I'll spend longer counseling them on those risks, like the sight unseen offer with no contingencies. I spent a lot more time running through the risks and the potential problems that could arise than I normally would, just because I felt like the risks were magnified. But at the end of the day, that's what they wanted to do, and so that is what we did. The I'm sure there's similar forms throughout the country. Here, when the market got hot and there were so many competitive situations, multiple offer situations with people not including contingencies and inspections and all of those things, our local realtor association added a form that has the various contingencies and inspections and all of that. And it says basically, I am choosing to not include these in my offer, and I understand the risks and am going forward regardless. And then you have your client sign those. Just gives you a little bit of additional legal protection on that. Home warranty, it probably varies widely. Here, home warranties aren't much of a thing. Sellers don't offer them that often. Buyers don't ask for them that often. But it does happen on occasion, and that's just something. If your buyer is looking at a home where they have some concerns about the ages of the appliances, the ages of the systems, they don't want to have any big ticket repairs coming up in the near term, then you can either ask for the home warranty as part of the offer, have the seller cover the cost of that. Here, home warranties tend to run $500 to $800 to cover the property for a year. And if the seller says no and your buyer wants it and sufficiently, they can always cover the cost themselves. Repair limits. Here, the way the inspection contingency works is you either have a right to cancel or a right to negotiate, or both. If you have the right to negotiate, there aren't limits on repairs. That's to be negotiated later. From how this is presented, my assumption is there are limits uh, in other offers, and you would actually put those limits into the contract. That's not the case here. But if that exists in your jurisdiction, that would just be um, one more thing to consider when your clients are writing the offer. And when it comes to repair limits, kind of an important thing is, so even if you can finance a $500,000, a million, whatever dollar home, a lot of times after paying the down payment and closing costs, buyers don't have a lot of cash on hand after settlement, and they don't have a lot of funds, therefore, to cover high ticket repair costs. And so that's where this becomes particularly important to try to get this either rolled into the cost of the home or have the seller cover it. Special clauses, that can be essentially limitless. I mean, home 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 purchase contingencies where the seller wants to be able to purchase another home before that goes to settlement. There are a lot of unusual contingencies, and I don't know what they are in your various jurisdictions, so I'm not really going to cover them um, beyond that in detail, but it's just important to note if there are any unique situations that cover your circumstances and your forms reflect those, or you would like them incorporated in the offer to protect your client's interest or promote your client's interest, you should be sure to do so. The So the offer process, once you and your clients have discussed these various terms, review the contract with your client, run through the various paragraphs and highlight the key terms that you've discussed, they've decided on, make sure that reflects their understanding. Make sure your buyer understands the contract. Nobody wants to have a complaint go against them in front of the real estate commission with a client who is claiming that you got them ratified on a deal that they didn't understand. And it's nobody wants that, but you also don't want to have an unhappy client who feels like they weren't properly counseled. So just make sure your clients understand. I tell my clients that, and even though I have a legal background, but I don't give my clients legal advice, and I always make that clear. But I also tell them that I will spend as much time reviewing a contract with them as they would like. I don't want to insult their intelligence. I don't want to assume they don't know things. But when they have questions, I want to make sure I run through every question they have and cover all of that before we submit an offer. Because going back to what I said, when you submit an offer, it's rare it's just accepted as is. But if it is, you're under contract. If you submit an offer and have not rescinded it and you get a return back that is signed, you're under contract. And it's too late to change your mind without legal repercussions. So very, very important to make sure your buyer understands the contract before that's submitted. Know what's essential in your area. Yes, Omatayo. Yeah, sorry if you missed the beginning, I had mentioned that I'm still a licensed attorney and practice law for many years. I don't actively practice anymore, but I maintain my license. But because of that, so none of us should be offering legal advice to our clients. But in particular here, I feel there could be a greater possibility of misunderstanding when we're talking about things that kind of toe the line. So frequently, anytime we talk about anything, I caveat it with this is not legal advice, but we should all be doing that. Anytime there are questions that sound like they're asking for a legal interpretation of the forms of the contracts of the offers, you should make clear that you are not offering legal advice and recommend that your client seek an attorney. Same thing with tax advice. We get stuff with the with FERPTA, or when it comes to capital gains withholdings, things like that. I'll always tell my clients and be like, well, my layman's understanding is this, but you need to speak to your tax professional about that specifically. We should not be offering tax advice or legal advice. No standard or common terms for offers in your area, and avoid rookie agent mistakes. So I actually think these two are kind of lumped together. I'll never forget my probably been licensed for a month or so, and I was talking to one of my buyer clients on the phone, and we were formalizing terms for an offer. And I was sharing an office with Ty Voiles, one of the co-founders of Fulcrum Residential, like mega agent. And my client said, "Hey, yeah, can we do 14 days for a home inspection contingency?" And I was like, "Yeah, that sounds good. I don't see why not." Hung up the phone, and Ty looked at me and he's like, "You can't. You just can't do that. Here, here for home inspection contingencies, anything over 7 days, the seller is just going to be red flags, and they're not going to agree to it." So it's important to know that when you're writing an offer, like what is generally considered within the acceptable range. And this goes back to kind of like putting your best foot forward to start and communicating and not doing things to give the other side reasons for concern. And an easy reason for concern is if you submit an offer that has crazy terms that no one would be fine with, and they can just kind of tip the hand that you don't really know what you're doing. So it's important to understand what standard or common terms are, and don't make mistakes. And hopefully, even I was lucky to be on a team to start, but we're all in an incredible brokerage. We all should have more experienced agents around that we can ask questions to. So if you only get one takeaway from this, I would say early on, don't ever submit an offer that a fellow agent hasn't also reviewed. And that's the wonderful thing about being in a brokerage like Keller Williams is, I know at least for me here, I've never had a lack of people willing to help me out. Anytime I ask for help, it's always multiple people willing to help out. All right, ahas or questions from what we just covered? Right, I know we're running to the time where we need to switch to negotiating offers pretty quickly, but force audience participation. I'd like at least one question or kind of aha, because usually if you when we have a group this size, what are we at right now? 94 people. If something I said wasn't clear to you, odds are it wasn't clear to 20 or 30 other people. Or if you have a question, something that you're wondering about, odds are, 10, 20, 30 other people are wondering about that. So I'd like at least one question, one thought, if for no other reason than just to
Well, I don't
show that.
have I'm sorry. I don't have like a specific question at this point. It's kind of like too early in the game for me. Um,
Gotcha.
Although I did have a sale, but I really didn't take, I was with another brokerage before joining Keller Williams.
Hmm.
So they kind of like did it for me, which was not to my benefit, because I didn't learn anything. I'm actually learning more from these meetings, from these Zoom meetings and webinars that I've been to at Keller Williams than from that one sale that I had with that company. I never like wrote the contract. No one ever went over how to even write the contract. I didn't even know where to get the contract from
Mm,
in the software, like, on the computer or anything. No one sat with me. No one showed me an example of a contract. No one showed me or taught me anything about all the things that you're saying about the offers and the contingencies, and make sure, the buyer or the seller agrees to the contract and understands the
hmm.
contract. I mean, all this is very, very useful information. Um, and that's why I'm,
Thank,
I'm kind of glad that I joined, Keller Williams.
mhm.
Um, so
Thank you for sharing that, Manuel. I I appreciate it.
Yeah.
And if anyone else is in a similar situation, even here now, like in the process of writing an offer, and you feel like you're not entirely sure what you're doing, but you don't want to let your clients know that because you want to make sure that you don't come across as inexperienced to them, just ask a colleague. You'll be surrounded with people who will help you. So yeah, that is just if the big only one takeaway from this session is just that there are other people to help. And please, please, if you're in the process of drafting an offer for the first time or even second time, or until you get comfortable, make sure you rely on your colleagues. And then related to that, and I would say this to newer agents on my team, I would say if you're as a new agent, I mean, you should be doing lead generation constantly. You could never do too much lead generation. But if for some reason you hit a wall where you had contacted every single person you could possibly contact and there was no more follow-up to be had and you just had extra time, I would always tell them to review the forms. And it's everyone's forms here vary. We're all over the country, and but that doesn't matter. Whatever your forms are, make sure you understand them. You can never spend too much time reviewing those forms and getting familiar with them because it's the foundation of our practice. I can't tell you how many times both sides. I can tell you how many times I've had an agent ask me a question. They had a problem. They were under contract. There was some huge problem. They didn't know what to do. And I would say, have you read the contract? I was like, read the relevant part in the contract, because that had their answer. And I knew it had the answer. And they just hadn't paid close enough attention to what the actual document says. And then the flip side of that is me doing the same thing. I would encounter a problem. I wouldn't know how to handle it. I would reach out to a broker or a more experienced agent. I would ask them, what do I do here? I have no idea what to do. They would say, have you read the contract? And I thought I had, but I hadn't. So usually the answer to most questions comes in those documents. And so the more quickly you can get familiar with what they are and just have that ingrained in your institutional knowledge, the better off you'll be. And then just side note to that, there's nothing more embarrassing than to be sitting running through a contract or a document with a client, have them ask you a question about what something means and not be able to answer it. So the more familiar you are with those forms, that'll help you avoid that embarrassing situation as well. Yep, practice writing contracts and knowing the wording. Absolutely. Can anyone share any strategy you use to win an offer? So I'll quickly add to that. It just, key points. So how to like win the day in a competitive situation. Going back to what we said, reach out to the listing agent, establish rapport, show that you are a competent agent. Ask them what their seller wants, what is important to them. I mean, there's no reason to be trying to just to guess and imagine what could be important when you have somebody who is going to be more than happy and more than willing to explicitly tell you what is important. And then it's sometimes you have to take those risks if your clients wish to, do a pre-inspection so you don't have an inspection contingency, or if your client has an incredible amount of cash on hand such that they could just shift money from the loan to how can I say this in an easy way without causing confusion if you're not familiar with this. So let's say your client is putting 50% down on their loan, but they could get approved with 5% down. If the appraisal comes in low, it almost doesn't matter. And they would be fine not having an appraisal contingency because the lender can still lend on whatever lower amount that came in at. So your buyer could simply shift what was going to be a down payment and just kind of pay it directly. So it's kind of the same thing. It'll make some differences for things like PMI and other instances. So it's not apples to apples, but admitting someone else. But it's like if your client has a lot of cash on hand, you have more flexibility with appraisals. Same thing. If they have a rock solid job, a lot of cash on hand, if financing is a slam dunk, then you can possibly not include that contingency. If your client is a contractor or you have someone who knows homes really well and you don't have time for a pre-inspection, maybe you can have a contractor or inspector come to the showing with you, take a look at the house. If you don't have concerns, maybe don't include that inspection contingency. If you're working with a great lender who can do a 2-week close, try to close as soon as possible if the seller would like that. Usually they do, or just move quickly. I've had many instances where I've had clients looking for properties that were just everything that came up was going to be extremely competitive. So we had a plan, and most properties here come on the market on a Thursday. And so if anything decent came on Thursday, we would try to see it as soon as possible. And there were instances where property came on the market Thursday. Some clients I got a property with not so long ago, hit the market on a Thursday. We did a pre-inspection with the showing at like 10 a.m. that day. I had the offer ready to go, signed already. We did the pre-inspection. They were like, okay, there are no deal breakers. Got out of the showing pre-inspection, submitted the offer right then with a 4-hour response deadline. And we made the terms sufficiently appealing to where the seller decided, okay, we might be able to get a better offer, but this is good enough. And so in a situation where we might have lost out, had there been more time for other buyers to get in the picture, because we moved incredibly quickly and because we had really strong terms, we were able to win the day. So those are just a couple of examples there. Sonia, I see you have a hand raised.
Two questions. So if the 4-hour time period wasn't enough and they came back and said no, in that scenario, would you say, okay, same offer extended for 24 hours? And the second question is, if time permits, if you can talk about repair limits, what does that mean and how do you look at those?
Okay. Yeah, for the first question, so first of all, when I called the agent as soon as I emailed the offer, and I said, and I'd already been speaking with this agent so that they knew we were seeing the property, knew my clients were very interested. And I said, hey, just want to let you know, you have an offer in your inbox. And I also want to let you know that apologies, this is extremely obnoxious, but we're asking for a response in 4 hours. And so I just made clear, I said, but it's because we love the home. We're hoping to make this an easy decision for you by having these strong terms. But we understand if it's not possible, we want to be reasonable. So just kind of let us know. So that's the approach I took then. Sometimes you have to play hardball. Sometimes it can be like, listen, we're asking for a response within this time frame, because if we can't get this home, my clients love this home, they want this home, this is their number one choice. But if they can't get it, they're moving on to choice two, because they're not going to lose both houses. And if that's the case, then you can have a hard deadline if that's what your clients want to do. And if you don't get a response in that time, you can move on to the next one. So it really depends on what the underlying situation is, what your clients wish to do, and how you want to tailor your negotiating tactics to it. Going back to the repair limits, so I'm just guessing what they are because we don't have them here. There's not in the way contracts are written, offers are presented. We don't have repair limits as part of the standard offer. But I'm assuming in other jurisdictions they do, where it will be, oh, if you have an inspection contingency where you can ask for repairs, you can cap it at X amount. So the sellers will know what their limit is. Here, there's no such thing. It's just simply a matter of negotiation. If we have a right to negotiate, you get under contract. Once the inspection has been performed, you submit the inspection report along with a list of requested repairs, and then it's negotiation. So the sides can either, the seller can either agree to repair, or they can agree to give a credit in the amount, and then that's all negotiated. We don't have repair limits, but like I said, I assume some jurisdictions do, and it's just a way of capping pre-capping exposure before you get to that point.
Thank you.
You are welcome. Excuse me. All right, running a little behind, so I'm going to pick up the pace. Present the offer checklist. So double check all documents. I mean, hopefully this stuff goes without being said. Like, make sure all of your documents in there. I've said multiple times now, like, you want to present yourself. Another way to win in a competitive situation is to present yourself as someone that the listing agent can rely on, because when the S hits the fan, it's like usually the agent on the other side who's going to be your best friend in keeping the deal going. And so I know there are times too where I've been the listing agent and we've had multiple offers, and some offers you can't really distinguish. And all things being equal, I'm going to go with the better agent because I have more faith their client is thoroughly counseled and that they're going to help get this thing through to settlement. And so there's no clearer way to communicate that you are not a competent agent by making mistakes in an offer that you submit. I mean, this is a legal document you're submitting. If you're submitting an offer with incorrect terms, incorrect names, misspellings, if you're not including all of the required forms, I mean, you're just raising your hand and telling the listing agent and the seller you don't know what you're doing, and you're probably going to continue not knowing what you're doing if they get under contract with you, and that's likely going to cause problems in getting to settlement. Follow instructions. Very important as well. If the seller has expressed clear preferences, ways of presenting the offer. A lot of times here, at least, listing agents will say, please present the offer in one document. So if you then send them an email with a lender letter as one document and every single form as separate attachments, that's just going to show that you're not following instructions, you're not paying attention, you don't have attention to detail, and this is probably going to carry through in the contract to close process. I've had our industry has a very low barrier to entry, and it's shocking the level of incompetence sometimes in agents. I've received offers on properties where the agent never reached out to me at all, and it went to spam. And I had no idea I'd even received an offer on a property and just stumbled upon it in my spam folder. And in one instance, this happened like a few times, but in one instance, so I pulled it out of spam and I realized that the agent was missing 2 required forms. So I reached out to the agent and I said, hey, you're missing these 2 forms. You indicated you had an inspection contingency in the cover email. You didn't include one in the contract. Do you want to modify this? Do you want to amend it? No response back. Reached out again, no response back. So automatically that offer, the value of that offer was pretty much zero, because neither I nor my clients had any faith that this agent knew what they were doing, that the buyers were serious, that we would be able to get to settlement with them. So that's an extreme case, but just little things, like I said, omitting required forms, misspellings, not having correct information, having inconsistencies between a summary and what's in the offer. And then just going on, so one thing that they say, email summary. I always have in my cover email, I have a summary of all key terms in a table, and then the first page of my offer is another summary of all key terms. Like, I want to make it as easy as possible for the listing agent to be able to digest what is in this offer, what I'm conveying. And it's like the easier you can make their job when they're receiving your offer, their assumption is you'll continue to make their job easier if you can get under contract on the way to closing. Notify the listing agent. Just hit this already. Super, super important. Like, don't just email an offer and assume they got it. Every time I submit an offer, I either text or call at the same time, and you want to make sure you get confirmation of receipt. Did I share those tables for my offer email? Yeah, actually, let me hold on 1 minute. Okay. So I'm going to share screen in case anybody wants to see this. Hold on 1 minute. Okay, this might be a little small. So someone in the chat asked if I could share the tables for your offer emails. So this is, okay, so this is my offer summary cover sheet. And so you can see I just have like, team name at the top, me, basic phone number, and then just hi, fill in whatever the agent is, let them know it's a summary of key terms. And then I have the key terms here below. If here we have escalation clauses, I don't know if you all do. I have another form of these that has, if there's an escalation clause, the escalation cap, the escalation factor, and then I have the effective net of the offer. So like the net proceeds the seller will get. Here now, because of how commission is being covered, typically I will add this bottom field. This will be like a miscellaneous thing if someone wants a radon inspection or something out of the ordinary. But here I'll also include the commission we are asking for if that hasn't already been discussed. So this I will PDF this, attach this as the first page with my offer, and then I also will just take it, copy and paste, and drop that in an email. Okay, add all documents to command. Well, and I know I'm not in command. Our team is of sufficient size that command can't handle everything we need to do, unfortunately. So we have a different CRM. So if you're, regardless of, if you're in command, load that all up. We'll be covering that in more detail on Thursday. But whatever your CRM is, just make sure you document it. For whatever reason, one of the things real estate agents seem to not enjoy doing kind of the underlying admin that's necessary to keep track of everything. And there's kind of no easier way to screw up a deal than to miss a deadline or not know something that's coming up or not know when an appraisal deadline is and not have it in your system to have a reminder to reach out to the loan officer if they're not on top of their game either. Consult with your buyer. Yeah, you always want, communication is key. There's no easier way to kind of upset a client than for them to be just sitting there feeling like they don't know what's happening and you're not communicating to them. And I will add to that, the time from submitting an offer to getting a response, I feel, is like the time of the absolute most anxiety and stress for a buyer. I mean, they're just going crazy from the time you submit it. And so I just tell my clients to begin with, I'll say, hey, we're entering a very, very stressful time. If you're feeling stressful, if you're feeling anxious, that's completely normal. Everyone is. I just want you to know that I will be, as soon as I know something, you will know something. I will keep you updated in real time. But if you haven't heard from me and you're getting nervous or you're worried, reach out. And I always just want to make that clear. So they're never sitting there wondering like, oh, what's happening? Is just something going on that I'm not aware of? Because I tell them I'm going to update them in real time. But I also say, hey, that being said, you can still reach out and just know that your clients will be experiencing that and kind of do what you can to set their mind at ease. Flip side of that is with my seller clients, if we only have one offer and it's not a competitive situation and there's no strategic or tactical reason for delay, I tell them, I say, hey, listen, this is an incredibly stressful and anxious time for these buyers. So let's try to get them a response as soon as reasonable. And by the way, it's in your best interest because until we ratify this contract, it's nothing. At any minute, they could be rescinding this offer and it could just evaporate. So it's in all parties' best interest to move quickly. And so just kind of preparing expectations, and it's kind of like objection handling. The best way to handle objections is to cover them before they arise. The best way to put your clients at ease is to handle anxiety in those stressful situations before they reach their peak. We have already covered pretty much. Okay, so this is the flip side. If you're the listing agent, if you are a listing agent receiving an offer, it's kind of how do you accept an offer? Just reply to the email. So question from Pablo in the chat, how do you accept an offer? There's the kind of unofficial way and then the official way. If what I like to do, in this consistent with what I've been saying, if I'm representing the seller and we are going to accept an offer, then I'll usually reach out to the buyer agent and say, hey, we're going to be accepting this. I'm preparing it for signature. We'll have it back to you within 2 hours, just so you know. So I just like to give them a heads up with the understanding that this is a stressful time for their clients and I want to make their lives as easy as possible because now we're working together towards a common goal. And you want to just establish and maintain that goodwill. If it's a multiple offer situation, then I'll typically tell the agents on the other side, hey, I will be presenting this to my clients at whatever time, and I expect to have a decision by whatever time. And I will let you know as soon as they reach a decision. So for the legal acceptance of an offer, your client either needs to fully sign and initial the terms as they were submitted to you, and then return it to the other party. And it's an offer. It's basically you have offer and acceptance. Acceptance happens when you agree to all terms, and that is communicated to the other side. Here, that happens via email. So once you send an email, that for most purposes, that is you're under contract, you are ratified, and that the documentation that the email was sent is proof of that. It's still nice to get receipt from the other side. So when you're a listing agent, when you receive an offer, just make sure it's complete. Run through, make sure all the terms are there. If they have a summary of key terms, it's good to use that as shorthand. Don't rely on that. Make sure everything in the offer matches what they've summarized, matches what you'll be conveying to your clients. Confirm receipt. Like, let's not try to make anyone even more anxious than possible than they would be already. So as soon as I get an offer, even if I haven't had a chance to review it yet, I'll respond to the buyer agent and I'll say, if it's just like, I'm like, hey, in the middle of something, haven't even had a chance to look at your offer, but I got it. And I'll be taking a look when I have a chance. So just confirm receipt as soon as you can. Get the offer to the seller in a timely manner. And that's usually if I have an offer deadline and I know there's going to be a multiple offer situation, I'll have pre-scheduled time to present with my sellers. I'll let them know when that will be. If it's not, if you just have a listing and an offer comes out of the blue, then just reach out to your clients, schedule a time to speak with them. Usually I will, even before that, once I get the offer, I'll forward them the full offer and that same summary of key terms that I use if I'm submitting an offer. Call the buyer's agent. It's also good, goodwill, rapport goes both ways. If you want to counter, if you want to change any terms, you're going to need the help of the buyer's agent. Call the lender. So this is huge. I always, anytime there's any kind of financing, my number one call is reaching out to the lender to get as much information as possible. And just key questions are like, is this a W-2 employee? I've had situations where the lender, said their client was eminently qualified, wonderful debt to income ratio, like incredible credit score, and they had their own business and one thing went wrong and all of a sudden they couldn't qualify anymore. And so that's just something that's important to know. Is this a regular salaried employee, or is this something like, where's the money coming from? How confident is the lender that this financing can be approved? At what level of information and verification has happened? Sometimes you'll have lenders say, oh, we fully underwritten everything. Everything's been verified. We're ready to go. We're just waiting on property and title and everything's good to go. Other times it'll be like an online application where nothing has been verified. And so that's important to be able to discuss with your clients to properly counsel them on the potential risk here. Of the financing and other terms. Create an outline document to reference when you call the sellers. That's the thing I showed before when I'm submitting an offer. That's the same thing I use when I'm summarizing offers. I have an Excel sheet that has those same columns and rows, and I'll have it, as many offers as there are, and you just kind of summarize the key terms, send it to them to use as reference when discussing that. Okay, once again, command, we're going to cover that on Thursday. Summary of where we were at before, where we started. We're not going to do role play here. Okay. Recap and ahas, and then usually, I know in these sessions you take a break to do a quick 5 minutes of text lead gen. I've fallen a little bit behind here. So what do we want to do? Kind of just like the most immediate response in the chat. Do people want to take a 5-minute break to text? Please continue, keep going. Okay, those were the first responses. So we're going to go ahead and keep going. But biggest kind of ahas, or maybe even more important than that, what might be more valuable is if there's a burning question you had going into this session, the make and receive offers, something you felt that was really important for you to know that we didn't cover, what is that? Is there something I mentioned that that created more questions than it gave answers. I'd like to hear a couple of those if anyone has them. Because like I said, we have a large group here. And so if there's something that's not clear to you, if there's a burning question you have, many other people are probably feeling the same way. Can you ask for proof that your offer was sent? I wouldn't recommend that because this goes back to what I was saying before about how you don't want to give the other agent a cause for concern. And if you're in a situation, and this does happen, so let me preface and kind of caveat this. If you're in a situation where you simply do not trust the agent on the other side and you think something nefarious is going on, I can see a situation where you might need to ask for some kind of formal proof that the offer was presented. And I know I've been in some sketchy situations where I can't believe kind of what's going on, and it's caused me to doubt the honesty and truthfulness of the agent on the other side. And then sometimes it's caused me to ask for proof and verification of things which I would never consider otherwise. We always ask for a signed rejection in our market. Thanks, Cami. Yeah, that's interesting. We never have, like, here. It's just simply, it'll come in, like, usually it will want it in writing, but it could just be a rejection of the offer. It could just be a reply to the email that was submitted in the offer saying, our sellers have decided to work with another buyer. We don't have an actual form that gets signed for a rejection, but clearly that's the case in other parts of the country. But just so touching on before we move on, the asking for proof the offer was submitted. If you don't have any major red flag, I wouldn't necessarily ask that question, because implicit with that question is a clear statement of, I don't trust you, to the other agent. And if you're trying to work with them, if you're trying to get them to work with your buyers and feel like you'll be somebody that will be easy to work with and that will get you both to the finish line, you don't necessarily want to erode trust like that unless they've given you a previous reason to do so. Yeah, communication, ultra critical, ultra critical. There's Popular Coach once said the agent should try to make presentation to the seller before contract is committed. Yeah, that's a good, related to that. It's good to set expectations. There have been times where I'll have an offer coming in and I know it's not going to be great. So I'll tell my sellers, I'm like, well, I've been told an offer's coming in. We have a registered offer. I'm expecting it today. Don't think you're going to love it, but even if that's the case, it'll be a great starting point. All right. There are no other burning questions. We will jump ahead to negotiating offers. Okay, what we're going to run through in a relatively compressed period is what is negotiation, 3 P's of negotiation, negotiating tips, recaps, and ahas. And this is something we've been building on now since we started at 6 o'clock. But really, the most important thing here, and just the most important takeaway, is just know what you're doing, prepare. Try not to make mistakes. Come across as someone who is competent and professional and will make the other agent's job easier, not harder. Be honest and truthful. Represent your clients to the best of your ability, without conveying any, like communicate as well as possible. Communicate as much information as is necessary and appropriate, but don't also convey confidential information or anything that is inappropriate. I've had circumstances on both sides where I've had an agent share confidential information with me, and it's like, on the one hand, it's helpful. On the other hand, it gives me a moment of pause, because if they're crossing the line here, where else are they going to cross the line, and what is their kind of overall level of confidence? So just like, I would say, in one sense, don't think of negotiation as this distinct or insular thing. just think of it as one component of your job where the skills that you bring to bear throughout all areas of the practice of real estate and in life, like the basic things that help you achieve success in other aspects of real estate or other aspects of your life, also are key to negotiation. Yeah, negotiation is not something to be feared or avoided. It's an everyday part of life. Every day involves negotiation. Just depends on the stakes and the formality of the situation. Okay, so this we touched on kind of the general path of negotiation is you have a situation where you submit the offer and it's accepted, and that's that. You know, that ends the negotiation in that specific instance. However, it doesn't necessarily end the negotiation. For here, I mentioned we have various contingencies. Inspection contingency is one of them. Even if we get under contract with no negotiation, with no counter offers, if there's an inspection contingency with a right to negotiate, after the inspection, there might be negotiation over what repairs would be made or what credits to be made. So an offer being accepted does not end negotiation completely, but it will end it for those immediate terms within the offer. So option 2 is you submit an offer and it's either rejected or countered. Like we said before, if an offer is rejected, don't assume that's the end of the discussion. If they haven't communicated clearly why, reach out to the agent on the other side, try to better understand why, and see if there's something you could do to change their mind. There's no harm in submitting another offer if you think it might be able to get your clients a little bit closer to their objections. And so that would be continued negotiation, whether the offer was accepted, or rather whether the offer was rejected or countered. And then that just kind of continues until either there is a clear rejection and the collective decision is made between you and your clients that it will not bear fruit to continue, or they accept, you're under contract, and then you move on. Who you negotiate with. So you negotiate with your clients and the agents on the other side of the transaction. And this is key. This relates to when I mentioned that I've had clients who wanted to submit offers that just had zero chance of being accepted and really would have harmed their chances of getting the home that they really wanted. And so that's kind of a negotiation with them. Like, yeah, I could submit this offer at these terms, but it's not in your best interest. Let me explain to you why. And so you counsel your clients, you negotiate with them before you even get to the point of formalizing these terms in the offer. Common points of negotiation. And it's nice that they've bookended these and combined them into one session because we've covered all of this before. But I said price, usually the most important thing. It's not the end all be all, because if a listing agent doesn't have faith that you can get from contract ratification to settlement, then price doesn't matter. And there have been times I've had sellers not accept the highest price. I've had my buyers win the day when they didn't have the highest price, because we were able to create the highest confidence that we would be able to settle at the best terms among those people they were confident could settle. And so it goes both ways. So price, very important, but everything else is important as well, because the listing agent needs to believe that you will actually close. If you don't close the transaction, doesn't matter what the ratification price is. When an offer is accepted, how am I able to know? Question in the chat. I mean, typically it's the same thing I mentioned before, where when I'm the listing agent, if my clients have decided to accept an offer, I'll usually call or text the buyer agent right then and say, hey, just wanted to let you know, we're still working on getting this thing formalized in writing, but my sellers have decided to work with your buyer. Congratulations to all of us. So happy to be working with you. I'll be getting it out via DocuSign within 30 minutes, and I should have it back to you in 2 hours, something like that. And so that's the ideal. You would know when offer is accepted because the other agent would give you a heads up that it's in the process of being ratified, and then you would receive an offer that has been fully signed by the sellers. And that's the legal way is you need to be in receipt of a ratified contract. And that is the formal legal notification that you are under contract. and proof of such, but usually the agents will give you a heads up beforehand. Terms, we've kind of run into all the terms and talked about the negotiation of that before, so I'm just going to jump ahead. 3 P's of negotiation: preparation. The more time you put into this before submitting the offer, the better position you're going to be in to win the day, because you'll just be able to, it's when I mentioned kind of the best objection handling is to handle the objections before they arise and find out what's important to the seller. Don't be putting terms into the offer that that you think are there. Like, don't be putting terms in the offer that aren't advantageous to your buyer, but you think are advantageous to your seller, and they're not. And adding more people. Don't make unnecessary mistakes. So learn as much as possible beforehand. Key to building confidence with the other side, ensuring a smooth process. And then present. Go into the negotiation process by presenting the offer. And one thing I do when I submit an offer is I usually have this in the email, but I'll also call to convey this to the agent. And just I try to increase their confidence as much as possible that we will get to settlement. Like I said, it doesn't matter what you get under contract if you're not going to settle. And so I will use my reputation, my track record, my team's reputation, my team's track record of getting people to closing. I will communicate with the listing agent that I thoroughly discuss this process from contract to close with my buyers. They fully understand the process. They fully understand the expectations, and that my buyers do not submit an offer on a property unless they fully intend to perform all of the terms of the contract through to settlement. And so I just try to kind of pre-negotiate. So before they're even talking to their sellers, the confidence that we will be able to make it to settlement is increasing, and it will help the way usually they communicate this offer to their clients, particularly if the terms aren't ideal for them. And then position, move both parties closer until you have full agreement. A clear example of this is just the obvious, you just split the difference. So list price is this, buyers come in, under, sellers counter, splitting the difference, you split the difference, eventually you kind of meet in the middle. And usually there's a little bit of movement on both sides. One tactic that I've used on occasion with my buyers where they really had a limit that the sellers weren't going to love is we would just say, either with the initial offer or our first counter to their counter, say like, listen, we don't want to waste anybody's time. So we are coming back with the strongest offer we can possibly submit. And we hope we can get it done at this. If we don't, that's all there is. And that sometimes can move the needle a little more, rather than just getting a counter back that you wouldn't be able to accept anyway. So the preparation is just, know your goal. That's rather obvious. Know your client. It's important to understand what their motivations are, what is important to them, what are they hoping to achieve. The only thing worse than losing out on a house that your buyers really loved is to get under contract on a house at terms that aren't really acceptable to your client. And sometimes in the heat of the moment, this can happen where your buyers will be really excited, they'll love the house, they'll agree to price and settlement terms, and then once they get under contract and the reality hits them, it's either too much money or it's too quick, or they can't make things happen within the time frame that you have laid out. So it's just very important to make sure that you thoroughly discuss all of these terms with them beforehand and their motivations, so that they completely understand what they're getting into, and make clear to them, like we've talked about, it's not legal advice, but let them know that they are submitting an offer, and if it's accepted, that is a legal obligation to them. And they will be expected to fulfill that obligation. And if they don't, if they breach the contract, they could be exposing themselves to legal liability and potential damages. So clear expectations, be informed, obey the laws, know the documents inside and out. So you're starting to hear, it's like a broken record, just hearing the same things over and over again. And it's just because it's like these things are very important. when I said just when you have spare time, read through your forms, understand those documents, know the answers to questions before they come up. Because if there are problems, usually the answers will lie somewhere within those documents. And if if you don't know what they say, um, that's just problems waiting to happen. The I was going to add something to that, and now it completely escapes me. Oh, related to know your goal. So something that I find helpful for price with my buyers is, and just to simplify this isn't always how the conversation goes, but let's just say that for illustrative purposes, they'll say, okay, Paul, we want to pay, I'll just pick a number, $600,000. Okay, we want to submit an offer for $600,000. And this is more in a competitive situation because if we're the only game in town, usually we'll get countered if it's not acceptable. Let's say it's a competitive situation and we know there are other offers. I'll say to them, okay, that's great. Well, I'll write the offer at 600,000. But I just want to make sure if I give you a call 2 hours from now and say another buyer got the home for 605, are you okay with that? And if they say no, then the number really isn't 600,000. And it's more, I'll actually run through this with them and ask them to do this exercise on their own. And so if they think it's their top number, just add a 5 to it or add a 10 to it and ask themselves, would they be okay if someone else got the home at that price? And if they are okay, then that's the number. They know their limit. They know their actual limit, like where they want to be on that home. But if they would not be okay finding out that another buyer got that house for a higher price, then you probably want to offer a higher price. And the only point of that exercise is just to make sure that whatever you're submitting is really what they want to submit. And sometimes it's hard to process this stuff in the abstract. So having these little mechanisms that can help them make it real before you submit it is really helpful, because like I said, you don't want them to be under contract with a property and then be like, oh wow, I paid too much, I don't really want this. By the same token, you don't want to be letting them know that another buyer got the property at terms they would have been more than happy to be committed to. Ask purposeful questions, and this really goes to all areas of our practice. We do a lot of talking. We do a lot of talking to our clients, at our clients, and sometimes we can be better served by just asking questions and being silent and just gaining as much information as possible, just about obvious things like specifics and terms, but just really motivation, and understanding your client's motivation will be really helpful if you get into an emotional negotiation. And I said before, sometimes you can have clients can get really worked up if they feel like the other side is not acting in a forthcoming or honorable way, or they're countering at terms that they don't think are acceptable. And when that happens, it's really helpful to just go back to just distill down into their motivation. Say, wait, you told me that you really wanted your daughter to go to this school. You said this home is 2 blocks away from where your parents live and how much it would mean to you. Is that still important? Like going back to that motivation. And if you didn't spend the time preparing beforehand and asking those purposeful questions, you might never know what that motivation is. Open versus closed-ended questions. I think this is pretty straightforward. Not sure if we have to cover in a lot of details, but open-ended questions. That's just, like, here's some examples. What additional information should I know? You ask the question and then you be quiet and let them talk. What is important to you about closing in 30 days? How do you feel about this? What would this do for you? Closed-ended questions are just, it's yes, no, or, what's the price you want to offer? 600,000. Do you want to have a home inspection contingency? No, although that could end up being a little more open-ended, but relatively straightforward. What and why questions. What would happen if? Why is this important to you? These are powerful questions really in all aspects of the practice of real estate, and not just submitting offers. But we would all be well served if at just various points when our clients told us something, we asked them why it's important to you. And I mean, that's just from the most basic blocks of the process and the relationship journey with your clients. From, I'd like a 2-bedroom condo. Okay, 2 bedrooms. Why is that important to you? It may be because they want to have a home workout studio. It may be because they want to have a guest room. It may be for a reason that can be satisfied outside of a bedroom, and you would never know that if you didn't ask them the question. So why is this important to you? Super, super valuable. And then what would happen if? And that's just helpful when you start to game plan and walk your clients through and allow them to visualize situations before they arise. Like I said, incredibly stressful time, anxiety levels are high. To the extent you can prepare your clients to deal with some of the things that will be happening beforehand, you will be better served. All right, we're going to skip this. Best practices when presenting, we covered this from the other side, but you always want to call the agent unless it's, sometimes if I'm dealing with a mega agent that I know is really like on the listing, but in name only, then you want to direct this communication to the co-listing agent or whoever the person is who's really handling the information. Or if it's just, say, a mega agent who I know is incredibly busy and won't want a call from me, then I'll text. But this is just, you know, you can take this for all aspects of your business. Just try to tailor the communication in the way that best suits the situation. And the same with our clients. If you have a client who hates talking on the phone, then maybe limit that to like key points where you really have to talk to them on the phone, and then text if they prefer texting. Or if you have someone who just likes email, whatever, just tailor your communication to whatever works best in that situation. You know, this is basic communication 101. Number 2 here, pay attention to nonverbal cues like pauses, voice qualities. Keep quiet once you present an offer. You know, that's once you present the offer and once you communicate the key things you want to communicate that we've talked about, just be quiet and listen and learn as much as you can. You know, listen carefully what's important to the other party. This is something we should have picked up beforehand. You should know that beforehand, but sometimes you can't learn things until it's real. Sometimes it takes submitting an offer before you can get that additional level of information in detail. Stay calm and relaxed. Mention that will serve you well throughout the process. It's, if you ever start to feel yourself getting upset, getting emotional about it, just take a step back and pause. And you need to do as much as you can to eliminate that, because that will not serve your clients well. It doesn't serve your clients well. Sometimes it's helpful if they're getting upset to say, listen, I understand why you're upset. That's a very natural reaction. If I was in your situation, I would be upset too. But just stoking the fire of like, yeah, they're really trying to screw you over, that's not going to help anyone. Just focus on the needs, focus on the goals, and try to get yourself to the finish line. So position. These, again, just kind of negotiation basics. Acknowledge and affirm common ground. If you get a counter offer that is widely divergent on price, you know, you can just focus on the fact that it's like, listen, this is great. They agreed to the home inspection. They agreed to the settlement date. They agreed to the earnest money deposit. We are right there. You know, all we need to do is get a little closer on cost. And then just, you know, what and how questions work with both. Talk about negotiating with your client and negotiating with the other side. Just really drilling down. Don't make assumptions. Make sure you understand exactly the position of the seller on the other side and your clients. Don't assume you know that. Positioning is a process. This isn't something that you're just going to have one conversation and everything is going to be fixed. Usually it's a bit of a back and forth. And then knowing when to walk away. So as I just mentioned, it's sometimes you don't know the answers to questions until they are concretely presented to you. And a lot of times you'll have buyers who will say one thing. They'll say that they have limits, certain prices, certain terms, and then once they are presented with a concrete counteroffer from a seller, that will change. And that's very true. But these are all things that you should know as much as possible before this even happens. So you should understand your client's limits, and you want to check in again. So let's say if you've gone through that sales price process and your client said, okay, 605 is as high as I'm going to go, and you get a counter offer that's coming back at 610. You say, I understand you said before that 605 was your limit. Is that still the case? And if it is, if you reach a point where they have gone as far as they're willing to go, then you know it's time to walk away. And we should never be in a position where we're trying to convince our clients to agree to terms that they're not comfortable with, because usually the result of that will be getting under contract and then them not proceeding with the deal, either for a reason they have a right to do, or simply just walking out, and then they're in breach of the contract. They're probably upset with you and complaining to your broker or the real estate commission. So important to understand your client's limits and understand when it is time to walk away. Every deal cannot be had. Questions, thoughts from that?
Yes, I have a question. In terms of like how fast you close, like who really is in control of that? Because like I mentioned before, I had a sale that was a cash offer.
Mm-hmm.
And so the listing agent accepted the offer because she mentioned that the sellers wanted to close quickly because
Mm-hmm.
they had a baby and they had another baby on the way. So they were looking to move out. But in this particular case, and it was my very first experience, and I still don't know the ins and outs of this. It took a long time. The offer was put in August, and the closing was not until November 1st. And it was a cash offer. So I'm not understanding, like, and when I bought my own, I have a home I've had for 4 years. We had a loan, an FHA loan. It took us the
Mm-hmm.
same amount of time. I think we came to see the house in that June of
Yeah.
2020.
A more detailed answer to this question is outside of the scope of this session, so I won't be able to go into that. But just ever so briefly, but I would say reach out to your broker or someone in your office, and they can run you through. Like, you can share more of the specifics, and they can explain that to you. But just generally, so here the way our contracts work is when if I'm representing a buyer and I submit an offer, it will have a settlement date on it, and it will either be a specific date or it will say a certain amount of days after ratification. And if that offer is accepted and we're under contract, that is the settlement date. That is the date required by the contract. So when you ratify a contract, at that moment, we know when the settlement date is. Now, things can arise, problems can arise. You might have to move the settlement date. The parties can mutually agree to that. But when you go under contract here and most everywhere, you will know the settlement date when that happens. And that's, I mean, it goes, you talk about like offer and acceptance. There has to be a meeting of the minds. The parties have to agree on key terms, and one of the most important key terms is the settlement date. So you should know when you get under contract when the settlement date will be. But good question. Thank you, Manuela. Okay, we have 8 minutes, and a lot of this stuff I've covered already. So be professional, keep goal in mind, pay attention, motivation, don't reveal too much. Yeah. So I'll just saw another question from Michelle. Multiple offer situation. Do you go back to the buyer's agent and allow them to improve their offer? Do you use love letters or some other method, strategy to communicate? Michelle, love both of these questions. You say love letters. So I love both of these questions very much. So for me, when I'm representing a seller in a multiple offer situation, usually it is because I know there will be a fair amount of interest and I've set an offer deadline. And I consider my job to be when we have an offer deadline, when I'm expecting multiple offers, my job is to get every offer coming in as strong as possible. And it's a bit of a fine line because you don't want to communicate that interest is too high to scare people away. But then you don't want to not communicate that interest is high and have people submit mediocre offers. So what I try to do, my personal approach, and all of this, all I'm saying is when you're conveying things, like, you have to be honest and truthful, but there's a way you can spin this. So within the lane of being honest and truthful, we have an obligation to be truthful with all parties. And so within that lane of just kind of how you want to spin that information. And so for me, it is, I always want to communicate to these buyers agents that this is a competitive situation. and they may not have a second chance. They may not have an opportunity to increase their offers. So they should come as strong as possible, because we are going to present these offers. I'm going to present them to my sellers. They're going to make a decision. And the next time they hear from me, it might be telling them their buyers lost out on the property. So that's generally how I approach that. But it's, as with all things, I'm not making the decisions here. I'm providing the information to my clients, and then they're making the decision. So sometimes I've had sellers who've just been like, yep, nope, I'll go back to all of them and tell them submit highest and best, and we'll take another look at it. And that's possible. But usually I try to create a situation where agents are submitting the strongest offers they possibly can at that deadline. And then we're simply making a decision then. And now here, I don't think all jurisdictions have escalation clauses. So that's something that makes it easier for us, in that we have the escalation clause, which acts as like an automatic counter where you have a cap and a factor. So if somebody submits an offer at, I'll go back to 600,000. If somebody submits an offer at 600,000, but there's another offer for 650, if they had an escalation clause that had a cap up to 680 with a factor of 10, their offer would automatically counter to 660. So it's a way to streamline the back and forth process. If you're in a jurisdiction that doesn't have escalation clauses, that's kind of impossible. And you can just say highest and best and make the decision, or you can go back to them, but it would be a little bit of a different situation. One thing I will do a lot of times is, if there's an offer my clients want to go with, it's the strongest offer in most ways, but there's a term or two we don't like, then we'll just go back to that buyer and say, hey, my clients would love to work with you, but this inspection contingency is not acceptable. Like, either take it out and we'll ratify with you, or if not, they might decide to go with another buyer. So that's kind of how that works generally. Second question, use love letters or some other method. I generally do not submit any letters like that from my buyer clients. And if they ask me to, the reason why is, I don't think I've ever received a love letter as a listing agent that didn't violate fair housing. And if any buyer agent talks about submitting a love letter, I say, listen, if it violates fair housing, I'm not going to submit it to my clients. And they always do. They always violate fair housing. Now, I know DC has a lot of protected classes, more so than some other areas. But it's just, they almost always violate fair housing. And so I just don't submit them. And so if I tell a buyer agent that if they give me a love letter and it violates fair housing, I'm not going to share that with my client, and then they do so anyways, it's like, are they listening to what I'm saying? Are they competent? What's going on here? So it just raises questions that you don't want to be raising. So in general, my advice would be, don't submit them because they violate fair housing. But if you can help your clients carefully craft a letter that doesn't violate fair housing, then by all means go for it. And I have before. I've actually had clients say, we wanted to tell you all of these things, why we love the house, but our agent said it would violate fair housing and wasn't appropriate. So we will and then they'll just objectively do things that are permissible. And then it's like, it's a double bonus, because it's a way of making us stand out in a legally permissible way. And it's also showing the other agent, listen, we are competent professionals. This agent on the other side knows what they're doing, and will probably make my life a little easier if we are ratifying with them and getting through to settlement. Great questions. Other questions, thoughts, comments? We have 2 minutes left.
Thank you so much for the class.
Absolutely. It was great to have you all here. I teach a ton of Ignite classes. It used to be in person. Now, since the pandemic, it's more online, and the number varies tremendously. Been anywhere from like me and 2 people to like this level of size. So it's always kind of fun when we have more engagement, more good questions. And real estate can be a tough business. I don't know, the numbers are something like, within 2 or 3 years, 80 to 90% of people are out of the business. But just being here, being in these sessions, going to trainings, taking advantage of the collective resources we have as a brokerage, that just puts you in a better position, because not everyone is doing this. And if you look at the statistics, Keller Williams keeps track of this, and it's like the people who attend more trainings, who avail themselves to more of these opportunities, do more business and are more successful. And so the last thing I'll add it's not related to anything that's making or receiving offers or negotiating, but the reason I believe that most people are out of the real estate business within a year or two is because what is most important to the success of your business has no immediate impact in your day to day. And that is most important is lead generation and lead conversion, and just regularly spending time doing that. And the best practices are generally you block off certain times, certain days of the week. You don't let any outside interference happen, and you just focus on that. But if you're sitting there making your open house follow-up calls, and you're calling the fifth person who's been like, don't bother me anymore, and hanging up, and you're getting a little down, and then all of a sudden someone calls you up and is like, oh, this property just came on the market, I want to see it in 5 minutes, are you available? Well, if you say no, immediate pain. This person's not happy with you. You're hungry. You need business. You're thinking, oh, I need to do everything I can to get a transaction. So if you say no, that's a hard thing. If you say yes, immediate gratification. This person is happy. You've made their day. You get to go out and see properties, which is fun. Could be a lot more fun than calling cold leads. But over time, that will harm your business, because you will have more than enough time in the day to do showings and do home inspections and write offers. If you block it off in most instances, if you just say, okay, these are the hours when I service clients, and these are the hours when I generate my business. And the hours spent generating your business is just, it's like, that's your 20%, the Pareto principle. I mean, that's where your future is. And if you don't do it, you're not going to see immediate pain or pleasure that day, the following week. Usually our efforts take 30, 60, 90 days to see results. But if you don't do it, and more often than not, you attend whatever the squeaky wheel is kind of chirping at you at that moment, 6 months, 9 months, a year down the road, your income won't be sustaining your expenses, and you'll be finding something else to do. So just focus on what's important, focus on kind of the difficult, and then you'll have plenty of opportunity to be doing all of the fun stuff and have a thriving career for years to come. Oh yes, I'm supposed to ask for reviews and feedback. Was that in the slide? Let me check that out.
Typically, they put a QR code.
I think it might be. I thought it was supposed to be in here. Okay, if it's here, my apologies. I can't
I
find
do
it.
have a question, Paul. Great class.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Now,
you.
if there are multiple offers, there's one which is 5,000 more on a 600 maybe, or whatever, say 7,000 more. And there's another offer that has no inspection. What would you recommend to your client? Is the no inspection one slightly tempting?
It really depends on the situation, and there's no easy answer for this. So me personally, I do, and whenever I say I do, it's like subject to the desire of the clients. But my recommendation for my listings is always that I do a pre-inspection. I pay for it. It's part of my commission before we hit the market. So I understand the full condition of the home. And if my client's okay with that, we go ahead and do it. So if I have a property that I know is great because I've inspected it, and I know no issues are going to come up, then I'll take the money with the inspection, because I know that it's not going to cause a problem, and that the 5,000 or 7,000 more dollars is going to be 5,000 or 7,000 we're going to be able to keep, because they're not going to find problems on the inspection. Flip side, if I know there are problems with the home that could cost above that, then I might counsel my clients to, take less money to avoid the home inspection, because we have greater exposure on the home inspection. If you don't have that level of information, or it's a closer call, or you just don't know, then it's really just a conversation with your clients of, okay, what is more important to you? Would you rather take the higher price now, knowing that that might get negotiated down, to a lower level, are you okay with that risk to get the potential reward? Or would you rather just know the price you're ratifying at is the price you're going to get? And you know, that's all it is. It's all you just explain what's happening to your client, and then they make the informed decision.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you all for joining today. If there's one last question, I can answer it real quick. Otherwise, I will jump off and let y'all go. Going.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Slide deck be in the Ignite.
Thank you.
So the slide deck should have you should have a URL, a link to all of the materials for all of these sessions. If you don't, just reach out to whoever it is that helped facilitate you signing up for this, and they can give you that link. I don't have it handy right now. All right. Thank you all. Take care.